Hey everyone, it's time for another good word from God's Word. Here we are, we've been reading through the Bible chapter by chapter every single day this year, which is pretty impressive that we've made it all the way here. So if you've been following along with us, today is the final chapter of Second Kings. Big day. Woo, big day. So Second Kings is really, it's the story of the fall of Israel and the fall of Judah, and it covers up the last time of like kind of kings in Israel and kings of Judah. And First and Second Chronicles is kind of like a repeat of what First and Second Kings is. It's just told from a different perspective, and so it gives a little detail here and there. My personal favorite way to read these four books, First, Second Kings, First, Second Chronicles, is to read it in a chronological way. You end up getting repeat information in both places, but it helps. Sometimes there's nuance that's in Chronicles that's not in Kings, and vice versa. So in 2 Kings 25, we finally see the fall of Judah. A few chapters before that, we saw Israel fall, which is the northern kingdom. They never really followed God. There was never any kind of redemption or any time that they ever came to follow God. They did it here and there, but not really. But Judah kind of went back and forth, and as we talked about last week with Joash, they actually did. And then Hezekiah came in, and they turned back to God, and so God let them stay longer. But ultimately, they broke their covenant with God as well, and so God said, "All right, we're going to punish you." And so your punishment is you get to sit in timeout for 70 years, which is a long time. But if you're talking about an entire nation, okay. So he uses King Nebuchadnezzar to come in and take out Israel and take out Judah and ultimately take down Jerusalem. And the way they did it is that the way a lot of them did it when they were taking over an entire city is that they would siege it, which means that the entire army would set around the city to where no one could get in or out, and then they would just sit there until people died and until people were starving, and then say if someone would break out or the walls would break down. And so that's what happened. They were sat there for 4 months, and the starvation became so great that people started to become cannibals, and it ultimately fell. And so Nebuchadnezzar came in and with his armies, and they pillaged all of Jerusalem, the palace, everything, and they ultimately took everything out of the temple. And it goes into great detail of how they took out the bronze pillars and the capitals and the pomegranates. And the pomegranates are just little balls that they had at the top of these things. And they took everything out of the temple, and it was lost. And the reason why Second Kings goes into such detail as to what's going on is because this was the temple was the most holy place. This is where they believed that their God lived. This is where God did. He dwelled in that place. And by that falling, the Israelites really discovered on that day that God had abandoned them. God had left them, but it was because of their sin. And so we have to, as we read this, we have to ask ourselves, what does this have to do with us and us 2,000 or 3,000 years later? It's not 3,000. It's a long time. 2,500 years later. What do we have to do with this? What are we supposed to do with this information? And the thing for us is that the temple of God is not a physical place. It's not a building. The temple of God is us. That's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 3:16. He says, "Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God dwells within your midst?" You see, we know that God will never leave us and he will never forsake us because he's made a promise to us, and he has made a promise to us that he was always going to be there with us, even despite our sin, is that if we choose to follow God, he will always be there with us, which is a great encouragement through the tough times that we have. And because we know that God's Spirit is within us, that's a whole nother way to think about life and think about what's going on. The choices that we make is that God's Spirit dwells in us, and like God's Spirit, the God who can do anything at any time, he lives within us. He dwells within our midst. And so as we go through trials and tribulations, we go through troubles, and we're just worried about what to do next and how we're going to get things done and what's going to happen, We can just trust that God is with us because we are the temple, and that we'll never have to feel like what the Israelites felt. And so we can always trust God that He is with us. So that's today's good word from God's word. I hope you're doing great today. We are tomorrow. We're starting a brand new series called Home for Christmas, and we're looking at different movies, different Christmas movies as we go through the entire month. And next week, not next week, tomorrow is The Grinch, and it's going to be a great time. The kids are singing. It's going to be an awesome time. So I hope you can join us online or in person, and it's going to be an awesome, awesome day. So hope you're doing great. We will see you all next time on the next good word from God's word. Bye bye.